without wanting to sound too pious, sorry, I'm a preacher's kid and I'm still trying to put that behind me, how can I use this for the greater good? And I'd had a bit of an environmental epiphany in the meantime, when I had been reading about the Hopi tribe of North America and their philosophy that we need to, I mean, it's pretty obvious really, or it was to me when I read it, that we have to look after the world if we want it to look after us. And if we keep pumping out toxins and crap into the world on a finite earth, where's it going to go? Eventually, it's going to come back to us. And when I read that, I was like, how come I never realised this before? Why did nobody tell me? All these years, I've been so focused on money and consumerism and stuff. And I've probably had this horrendous impact on the planet without even stopping to think about it. And I thought, if I, as a well-educated, professional Westerner, have been this oblivious, and this is about 8 years ago, when maybe these things weren't as in the public awareness as they are now, I thought maybe other people are also unaware. And what can I do to help bring this to people's attention? So that was my strong reason why. I realised this was important. My boat was my platform for getting this message out there. So, the stats for Pacific Stage 1, a mere 99 days compared to 103 on the Atlantic. The big discovery on this stage was audiobooks. Saved my sanity. I pretty much ran out of thoughts to think after the Atlantic, so a bit of mental stimulation was very welcome. Watermaker's broken. 2, a water maker is what provides my drinking water. So it's fairly important really, as in the difference between life and death. And I only had 2 water makers on board, so when the second one broke, this was not ideal. Luckily, there were some other people out there on the ocean at the same time as me. And our courses gradually converged. They're the green line, they'd left from Long Beach, and I was the red line, leaving from San Francisco. And this little pointer here is where we met up for dinner, as you do, in the middle of the ocean. And they were able to resupply me with water, and I was able to resupply them with food. Their crossing was taking them much longer than they'd expected, partly because their boat looked like this. It was called the junk raft, and it was made totally out of junk. 15,000 empty water bottles, lashed together into 2 pontoons. Then with a very open kind of grid of a deck made out of yacht masts, and their cabin was the fuselage of a Cessna aircraft. And part of the reason their voyage was taking so long was that they got as far as Catalina Island, and the lids on all their water bottles had started unscrewing. They started like sinking, and they'd had to pull in and do all the lids up again. So they were down to eating peanut butter out of the jar by this stage. They had no other food left, apart from the occasional fish that they caught. And I was lucky, the night that I met up with them, they caught a beautiful big mahi-mahi, which went down so well. I think I ate 5 portions. They kept going, oh, we're pretty full. How are you doing, Ross? I go, well, I could manage a bit more. And luckily that fish was a lot better than this one, which they caught a couple of weeks earlier. And when they opened this one up, they found all this plastic in its stomach. And you might have heard of the North Pacific garbage patch, where there's apparently about 3.5 million tons of trash floating around in the ocean. And in fact, there might be even more of it on the ocean floor, where it causes almost as much damage. And it's getting eaten by fish, and plastic bags are often eaten by turtles, which mistake them for their favourite food of jellyfish. I mean, you can imagine the mistake is easy to make. It's impacting the marine life, but it's also eventually impacting us, because if we eat this fish, the chemicals get leached out, as you know, with the scare about the BPAs in water bottles. The chemicals leak out into the flesh, and then, you know, when we eat it, we're at the top of the food chain, and so it's accumulating to quite scary levels. So it's not just a problem floating around out there in the middle of the ocean that we can forget about because out of sight is out of mind. It's a problem on our dinner plates as well. But I know you guys know this. So what I was campaigning to ask people to do during that first stage of my row was to say, please say no to plastic bags. Remember to take your reusable grocery bags. Use reusable water bottles and reusable coffee cups rather than using styrofoam or paper cups with plastic lids on. If everybody did just those 3 things, it would make such a difference. I mean, if you stand out, you probably don't have a Starbucks in Asheville because you're too cool. But when you stand outside a Starbucks in New York and you just see all those cups coming out, and those, you know, for the iced drinks, they have the plastic cups. It all has to go somewhere, either into landfill or into the ocean, but on a finite earth, there is no true way. It all sticks around, and plastic especially, it just makes no sense to have disposable things made out of an essentially non-disposable substance. It's crazy, especially now there are 7 billion of us all doing the same. So, okay, I'll get back out of my pulpit in a moment. The guys on the junk craft were trawling a little mesh behind them each day, and typically they were finding their samples consisted of 6 times as much plastic as plankton. And it's partly because plankton is decreasing. A study came out just a couple of weeks ago saying that the amount of phytoplankton, which is the absolute base of the whole food chain in the ocean, has declined by 40% in the last 60 years. Pretty dramatic. And at the same time, in the last 60 years, the plastic has obviously been increasing. So it's all a topsy-turvy, upside-down, nasty situation out there, pretty much plastic soup, even thousands of miles from land. The following year, Pacific Stage 2 was notable mostly for the amount of wildlife I saw, of which the coolest thing was a whale shark. This beautiful, big, actually it was only a baby, it was only 8 feet long. The adults go to about 30 feet, and they're vegetarian sharks. Very, very pretty. Squid, I've got squid stories, but I'm talking for too long, so I'll move along, but if anyone wants to hear my squid story, I'll tell you afterwards. And after 104 days at sea, I arrived in Tarawa, which, if you see that tiny little green sliver on the horizon, that is Tarawa. And a bit like the Maldives, they are very nervous about climate change, because they expect that within the next 100 years, they're going to have to find somewhere else to live, because they expect to be either submerged or affected by more extreme weather events, which climate scientists expect to be a side effect of climate change. And those extreme weather events will send big waves crashing in over the fringing reef, which will contaminate their fresh water supply, which is a very fragile resource there. So they think that life is just going to become unsustainable there, and they'll have to move to Australia, New Zealand, somewhere like that. So I had a very interesting meeting with the president there, who's basically designing the exit strategy for his country. And I saw him again in Copenhagen at the Climate Change Conference last December. And it was the last night of the conference where pretty much the whole thing had fallen apart. There was no fair and binding treaty. The superpowers, the big economic powers, just don't care about a little tin pot country in the middle of the Pacific with a GDP less than the average HBO TV series costs to make. So they were being quite plucky. They were saying, we're not going to lie down and go away just because we didn't manage to make our voices heard here. But it looked a little bit like the mouse squeaking at the elephant. So I hope that better things happen in Mexico this coming year. But it's difficult. Money talks, and they just are not a viable economic power. Third and final stage of the Pacific finished 3 months and 4 days ago. And was a total surprise in how fast it was. All my previous crossings were like 103 days, 99 days, 104 days, and I usually use about £30. Great. This year, 46 days, £10. So, unfortunately, I'd obviously quite happily chowed down £30 worth of calories in the run up to the row. So I'm sort of trying to lose it the hard way now. And unfortunately, not very much wildlife on this one. It was mostly container ships that I saw while I was out there, sometimes 5 at a time. And yeah, things are changing on the ocean. It's not the great wilderness that it once was. Fantastic arrival in Madang.